Okay, so welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We love getting into the weeds, and this time we are heading straight into the heart of Portage government.
Yeah, taking a look under the hood, seeing what's really going on.
Right, and this deep dive was totally sparked by you, our listeners, because you sent us a whole stack of recordings from some fascinating public meetings.
I mean, you really hooked us up.
We've got the Planning Commission, the City Council, the Board of Works, and even the Redevelopment Commission.
The whole gang's here.
Exactly. It's like getting a backstage pass to how decisions are made in Portage.
And these recordings are all from late January and February 2025, so it's a really fresh look.
Fresh off the presses, and let me tell you, there's a lot to unpack here. Everything from the ins and outs of a brand new housing development to the city's approach to zoning, those tricky budget adjustments, big infrastructure plans, and even their vision for economic growth.
Yeah, you name it, they talked about it.
And because we know you, our listeners, are the kind of people who want to get to the heart of the matter quickly without missing the important stuff, we're going to do the heavy lifting for you.
We'll sift through it all, pull out the really juicy bits, connect the dots, and give you the big picture.
So you can walk away feeling like you're right there in the room.
Front row seats to Portage's future.
Okay, so let's jump right into a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
This proposed new residential development off Route 6.
Yeah, this one's generating a lot of buzz. A 153-unit paired villa subdivision that was presented to the Planning Commission back on February 3rd.
153 units, that's a pretty decent-sized development for Portage.
It is, and what's interesting is they've already done a lot of the legwork. They've got variances for both sanitary and stormwater systems.
So for those of us who aren't fluent in zoning jargon, what exactly is a variance?
Basically, it's like a permission slip to deviate from the standard rules, often because a particular site has unique challenges or characteristics.
Ah, so they're getting a little wiggle room to make things work.
Yeah. And one thing that really jumped out at me was the size of the proposed stormwater detention basin. They're going way above and beyond what's typically required, like 50 to 70% larger.
Wow, that's a big basin. So
Yeah.
it sounds like they're taking those past drainage problems in that area very seriously.
Yeah, no kidding. Those detention basins are key for managing stormwater runoff and preventing flooding, especially with all that new pavement going in.
And this one's set to discharge at the southwest corner of the property. It's good that they're being so proactive about it.
Definitely trying to avoid those headaches down the road. And they're also putting in rear yard drains on all the properties, which is in line with the city's updated ordinance.
So all that rainwater is going to be carefully channeled away.
Every drop accounted for.
It's also really nice to see that they're preserving that 2-acre wooded wetland in the southeast corner. They're not even trying to get any tree credits for it.
Yeah, that was a good sign. Shows they're not just trying to check boxes. They seem to genuinely care about keeping some of that natural character.
And for folks who might not know about tree credits, sometimes developers get those for preserving existing trees or planting new ones. It can offset other landscaping requirements.
It's like a way to balance out the development impact.
But in this case, they're preserving that wetland just for the sake of preserving it.
Good for them.
Okay, so what about access, getting in and out of this development and, the overall look and feel?
So the main entrance is going to be off Route 6, pretty standard, and the sign design is still waiting on approval from the state transportation folks.
Ah, yes. Indy, everyone's favorite hurdle.
But hey, got to make sure everything's up to snuff. And the Planning Commission staff had 3 main conditions they wanted met, and the developer agreed to all of them.
Like a 3-point checklist.
First, they need that Indy approval for the entrance and the sign. Second, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM, has to approve the sanitary layout that's pretty routine.
Making sure the plumbing's all good.
And third, the Planning Commission staff needs to sign off on the tree locations, where they're going to be planted and what kinds of trees.
Right. So still some hoops to jump through, but it seems like things are moving along.
Yeah, and they gave a quick update on those conditions. They've already requested a meeting with UNDOT, but there's a chance of delays because UNDOT might require a primary plat for review.
A primary plant. Now, what in the world is that?
It's basically a detailed map showing how the whole subdivision's going to be laid out, the streets, the lots, the utilities, everything.
So like a blueprint for the whole shebang.
And they mentioned that this kind of NDOT review has caused similar holdups in Porter County, so it's something to keep an eye on.
A potential speed bump.
But the IDEM approval for the sanitary layout, that's usually pretty smooth sailing.
Fingers crossed, and for the tree placement, it sounds like they're going to be working closely with city staff and Indiana American Water to make sure those trees don't cause any trouble down the line.
Right, planting the right tree in the right spot so you don't end up with roots messing up the sewer lines or the sidewalks or anything like that.
Smart planning, got to think long term.
Absolutely. Okay, so now for the question on everyone's mind. What are these villas going to cost?
Yeah, show me the money.
Well, the developer estimated that prices would start somewhere between $225,000 and $250,000 for a home that's around 900 square feet.
Not exactly chump change.
And get this, just a year ago, they were estimating 200 to 225,000. So those prices are definitely climbing.
The market's just going bonkers, and these prices are likely to go up even more because construction probably won't start until next year.
So if you're thinking of buying a new home in Portage, sooner rather than later might be the way to go.
So even a relatively modest new home is getting close to $250,000. Wowza. And these villas will be built on floating slabs, so no basements, stick-built construction, and aluminum siding.
Pretty standard for new construction these days, gives you a sense of what to expect.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the city ordinances and budget adjustments that came up at the city council meeting.
Yeah, they had quite the agenda.
Lots to cover.
One of the first things they tackled was proposed changes to the rules about what materials can be used for residential driveways and how people should get rid of their fireworks debris, after the 4th of July.
Keeping those neighborhoods looking sharp and safe.
Right, but the fireworks ordinance sparked a really interesting conversation about enforceability. How do you actually make sure people are disposing of fireworks properly?
Right. It's not like the fireworks police are going to be out there patrolling the streets.
Exactly. It's just not practical. So the consensus was that enforcement would be complaint-driven, meaning they'll only take action if someone reports a violation.
So neighborly vigilance is the key here.
If you see something, say something.
Okay. Then they moved on to salary matters. Always a sensitive topic.
It is. And the first one up was Salary Ordinance 2503, which essentially reclassified a position from team management event coordinator to public relations specialist and bumped the salary up to $55,000.
So a title change and a pay raise.
But importantly, this increase was already accounted for in the budget, so no surprises there.
Good to know, but it sounds like there was a little bit of discussion about this change.
Yeah, there were some concerns about making sure that compensation is fair across all city positions, ensuring equity for everyone.
That's a valid point. You don't want anyone feeling undervalued.
Right after that, they approved another salary ordinance amendment, this one for a payroll clerk in the clerk treasurer's office.
Bro.
Her salary was increased to match what she was making in her previous job in Valparaiso.
So they're recognizing her experience and expertise.
Exactly. And again, this increase was already in the budget. They also highlighted how critical her role is.
And it sounds like her role might be expanding even further.
You're right. There was talk about her taking on some extra duties related to the Redevelopment Commission's finances. And the RDC agreed to pay her an additional $5,000 per year for these extra responsibilities.
So they're compensating her fairly for the added workload.
And that $5,000 is tied to the position, not the person. So whoever holds that job gets that extra pay.
Makes sense. Keeps things consistent. All right, so there was also some back and forth about Salary Ordinance 2508, which had to do with the city planner, right?
Yeah, this one got a little more complicated. They were proposing a salary increase for the city planner with the RDC chipping in $5,000 to recognize the extra work she does for them.
So kind of like a joint effort to support the position.
But just like with that earlier discussion, there were concerns about potentially creating pay disparities with other administrative roles in the city. You don't want to create an imbalance.
Right, got to keep things equitable.
And this actually led to an initial motion to deny the increase.
Oh, wow, so they were putting their foot down.
But then after they clarified a few things specifically about a previous first reading of the ordinance, which is just a procedural step in how they do things, someone made a motion to approve the increase. And it passed.
So they hashed it out and came to agreement.
They also mentioned that the city council had gotten a job description outlining the planner's duties beforehand, so everyone was on the same page.
Transparency is always good. Okay, so let's move on to some broader financial matters. Resolution 2503 authorized the clerk treasurer to make transfers between major budget categories. This sounds like it might be connected to those accounting issues from a while back.
Yeah, you're picking up what we're putting down. This resolution was all about reconciling discrepancies from past fiscal years going all the way back to 2017.
Oh, way back.
Apparently, they couldn't account for a hefty chunk of change, about $687,000 out of a total of roughly $1.6 million.
Yikes, that's a lot of missing money.
It is, but they were quick to point out that they've put new standards and controls in place to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Better late than never.
Definitely. And while they didn't get into the nitty-gritty of what caused those past issues, The fact that they're emphasizing these new measures suggests they've identified the weaknesses and they're taking steps to be more fiscally responsible.
Which is really crucial for maintaining public trust.
Absolutely. Okay, so shifting gears again, they also gave an update on that unsafe building hearing. Remember that one?
Yeah, these situations can be tricky. Balancing property rights with public safety.
It's a delicate balance for sure. So, the owner of this particular property had been given 10 business days to bring the house up to code or face demolition.
That's a pretty standard procedure. Give them a chance to fix things.
Right, but that deadline had passed, and the city was now moving forward with a bidding process to figure out if it's more cost-effective to repair the property or just tear it down.
So they're taking action to address those properties that pose a safety risk to the community.
Not letting things fall through the cracks.
Okay, now for a little bit of good news, the Portage Fire Department highlighted a really awesome program they're running.
Yeah, this one warmed my heart. They're using the old YMCA building on Evergreen Avenue to provide donated clothes and household items to folks in need, completely free of charge.
That's so fantastic. A real lifeline for those who are struggling.
And they said that just during the winter months, they gave out something like 1,500 coats and gloves.
Wow, that's a huge impact. And, if anyone's got stuff they're looking to donate, that sounds like a fantastic cause.
Definitely a great way to give back to the community.
Okay, so back to city business. An attorney service agreement was approved for stormwater-related legal matters.
Yeah, this one's with Ed Graham, and they did have to increase the fees a bit because the assistant city attorneys got raises. Makes sense.
So it's a continuation of their legal support for those all-important infrastructure issues.
Keeping the water flowing smoothly.
Speaking of infrastructure, there were a few specific concerns that were raised and addressed.
Yeah, first up was a leaning utility pole at a lift station on Dombey Street near Route 20, and IPCO was involved. And they did send an invoice for their work, but it seems like the situation's under control now. They also made sure the generator backup was working properly.
Leaning utility poles are definitely not something you want to ignore.
Nope, those things can come crashing down and cause all sorts of problems.
Better safe than sorry. And I think there was also a sinkhole, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. This one was on Sherwin Avenue, a 4-footer, and it turned out that a Frontier Line boring project had accidentally punched through a private lateral.
Oopsie.
Yeah, not ideal. And while you were fixing that, they also found a water main break by the water company in the same area. Talk about a double whammy.
So a bit of an infrastructure trifecta there, but it sounds like they got it all sorted out.
And Frontier will be getting an invoice for the city's costs for the sinkhole repair.
So they're holding them accountable.
You break it, you buy it.
And with all this crazy weather we've been having, pothole season is just around the corner.
Those freeze-thaw cycles are brutal on the roads.
So is the street department ready for battle?
They say they are. They'll be using cold patch for those quick fixes. And then once the asphalt plants open up in April, they'll start doing those more permanent repairs with hot mix.
Hot mix, the good stuff.
They also reminded everyone about those pesky parking restrictions during snow removal. Got to keep those streets clear for the plows.
Yeah, that's important. People forget. And they're even thinking about getting ice cleats for their employees to keep them safe while they're out there working in those icy conditions. Always good to prioritize safety.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the marina and those waterfront developments.
Portage has some prime real estate along the lakefront.
It does, and it sounds like they're making some progress on the marina front. They're currently processing slip payments, and there are actually 28 slips up for grabs because of forfeitures.
So you're looking for a spot to park your boat. Now's the time.
And the new 7-finger piers they ordered last year have finally arrived. They're planning to install them by April 15th.
New piers. That's exciting.
And they're also going to do some maintenance on those Kiko pump-out stations as soon as the weather cooperates.
Keeping things clean and functional.
Right. They also had to make a little correction to how they report user fee collections, just to reconcile some overlaps between the marina records and the clerk treasurer's office. But it sounds like everything's squared away now.
Glad to hear it. And what about those grant projects for the fish cleaning station and the fishing pier?
They're still working on the grant reporting for those, and the installation of the new public fishing pier access site actually started back in February.
So lots of positive developments happening down by the water.
It seems like it. Okay, so they also had a big discussion about the north side waterfront area, which is mostly owned by the RDC and the Port Authority.
This is a huge opportunity for Portage to really revitalize that whole area.
No doubt, and they're still in the early stages of planning, but they're definitely thinking big. They talked about maybe creating a formal letter of intent between the RDC and the Port Authority to solidify their partnership.
So a way to show they're serious about working together.
Exactly. And even though that formal agreement hasn't been hammered out yet, they're already having informal discussions about how to move forward.
So the wheels are turning.
And they're also looking into grant funding to deal with those derelict vessels in the area, those abandoned boats that are just sitting there rotting.
Yeah, those can be eyesores and environmental hazards. Got to get those taken care of.
Definitely. And on the Port Authority front, the DOT committee is going to stick with its current 2 members for now.
So no changes there.
And unfortunately, the Marina Shores dredging project is facing some potential delays, and those mobilization costs are looking higher than they initially anticipated. Water levels are also a big concern.
Dredging projects are always tricky. Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate.
It's a tough job. Okay, so switching gears one more time, the city asked for and received permission to enter into an agreement for road salt for the 2025-2026 winter season. They're going through the state bid process to get the best price.
Smart move road salt is essential for keeping those roads safe in the winter. And it can get expensive.
Yeah, those winter maintenance costs can really add up.
Okay, so now let's talk about equipment for the police and fire departments. The RDC plays a big role here.
They do. They actually approved a loan to the city to buy some much-needed public safety vehicles.
And the Board of Works will be handling the actual payment processing for those vehicles.
So it's a nice division of labor.
And we've got the scoop on those new vehicles. The police department got the okay to buy a used 2022 Ram ProMaster City cargo van for animal control. It had some damage that was repaired, and it only cost them $24,382.
So a good deal for a reliable vehicle.
And they also got the green light for 2 brand spanking new 2023 Dodge Ram pickup trucks.
Those were an older model year, but that meant they got a significant discount. They only paid $39,780 for each one.
So they're being fiscally responsible. And they also got approval to buy a 2024 Chevy Tahoe, which could potentially be used as a command center vehicle. That one came in at $50,750.
Another case of saving money by going with a slightly older model year.
Smart move. And they mentioned that the Board of Works had already given the thumbs up for a 2024 Chevy Silverado for the police department. The one cost just under $60,000, fully equipped.
Decked out and ready to roll.
And they're still waiting on those state bid prices for Dodge Durangos, which might end up being lower than they originally thought.
So they're exploring all their options to get the best bang for their buck.
That's how it's done.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the Gary National Bank Trust property. This seems like a pretty big deal.
It is. This property on the north side has been on the RDC's radar for a while, and they finally approved an amended purchase agreement for $1.5 million, which is actually down from their initial offer of $1.8 million.
So they managed to negotiate a lower price.
And a big part of that price reduction was that the seller gets to keep about 0.9 acres on the east side of the waterway. This section's leased to the Marquette Boat Club. And it wasn't really crucial for the RDC's plans anyway.
So everyone wins. The seller gets to keep a valuable piece of property, and the RDC gets the land they want at a better price.
It's exactly a win-win, and they actually presented a memo justifying the purchase price, which might be higher than a recent appraisal.
So they had to explain why they were willing to pay a little extra.
Right. They pointed out the property's strategic location, how it fits into their grand vision for waterfront redevelopment, and the positive economic impact they're anticipating.
Sounds like they're thinking long-term.
Definitely. And they also mentioned that while the property is divided up into several parcels with varying elevations, which had lowered its appraised value, the fact that the RDC already owns a lot of the surrounding land makes this acquisition even more valuable strategically.
It's all about connecting the dots.
It's like putting together a giant puzzle.
Oh, okay. So there was also an engineering services agreement that got approved.
Yeah, this one's with Great Lakes Engineering, who also happen to be the city engineer, and it's basically for them to double-check the engineering aspects of the RDC's projects.
Yeah.
Things like roads and other infrastructure.
So a second set of eyes to make sure everything's up to snuff.
Precisely. And this agreement mirrors the one they already have with the city itself, so it's all about having that extra layer of oversight to prevent problems down the road.
You can never be too careful when it comes to engineering.
Especially with big infrastructure projects.
Okay, now let's head back to the Planning Commission. They had a pretty interesting discussion about a rezoning request from Ladybug Laundry.
Yeah, this one caught my attention. They held a public hearing for this request, which is officially known as Z01-25. It's for a property on Willow Creek Road just north of Big B Coffee, and Ladybug Laundry wants to build a full-service laundry center there.
A fancy laundromat.
But they need to change the zoning from office commercial to personal services.
So a bit of a zoning hurdle to clear.
And the presenter did a good job of explaining why this change makes sense.
Mm.
They pointed out that it aligns with the city's comprehensive plan and that it would be a positive addition to the area because, let's face it, that current office commercial zoning hasn't really attracted much interest.
Yeah, sometimes those zones just don't pan out the way you expect them to.
Right. And they emphasized that this laundry facility would be environmentally friendly, offering both self-service and drop-off options, but no dry cleaning.
So no harsh chemicals.
And they also predicted that it wouldn't have much impact on traffic, maybe 50 cars per day at most.
It's not too bad. And they're even planning some outdoor amenities like cornhole and seating areas to make it a more pleasant experience for customers.
Yeah, they're really trying to create a community gathering spot, not just a place to wash your clothes.
So what was the public's reaction to all this?
Most of the comments were positive. Folks seemed to be on board with the idea, but one resident from a nearby street asked about the possibility of access from the back of the property, but the presenter said that wasn't in the cards because that area is fenced off.
So a minor concern, but not a deal breaker.
And the Planning Commission members had a few questions of their own. They wanted to know if it would be open 24 hours, which hasn't been decided yet, but they're considering community needs and local regulations.
24-hour laundromats can be convenient, but they can also cause some neighborhood issues.
Yeah.
Got to find that balance.
And they also talked about the payment systems, which will be completely coinless, cash credit, EBT, and even phone payment options with those reloadable cards.
So no more digging for quarters.
And lastly, they addressed safety concerns about the proposed stormwater retention pond, making sure kids wouldn't be tempted to play around there.
Right. They explained that it'll be a grassed area with a gentle slope, and it should stay pretty dry most of the time.
So no swimming allowed.
Not a good idea. So after all that discussion, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of the rezoning request.
So it's looking good for Ladybug Laundry.
Yeah, now it just needs to go before the City Council for a final vote.
Okay, so they also dealt with a fence variance request. These always seem to pop up.
They do. This one was from a resident named Karen Leandowski, who wants to put up a 5-foot vinyl PVC fence in her front yard.
Breaking the norm.
Yeah. Her property's on Hines Street in the Preston Trails development, and it's within the Airport Crossing Planned Unit development, which has some specific rules about fencing. So sometimes those rules need a little tweaking to fit specific situations.
And the Planning Commission approved her request.
One less hurdle for Karen.
Okay, so lastly, the Planning Commission tackled the Bower Farms Phase 1B primary plat approval.
Another step forward for residential development in Portage.
This one's for 34 new lots, and they did give their approval, but with a few conditions, the developer needs to finalize those bonding requirements, which are basically financial guarantees to make sure everything gets built the way it's supposed to.
Got to protect the city's interests.
Right, and they need to provide a surveyor's letter confirming that the corner lot markers are all in place, which they've already done apparently. And they also need to install an asphalt turnaround, sometimes called a hammerhead, on Viceroy Street, so those emergency vehicles have enough room to turn around.
Makes sense. You don't want those fire trucks getting stuck.
Not a good situation, and they're still working out some details with Great Lakes Engineering about possibly lowering some of the stormwater structures, but that'll be added to the bond.
So ironing out those final wrinkles.
And they're planning to put in that asphalt turnaround as soon as the asphalt plants open up, probably in late April or early May.
When the weather's a little more cooperative.
Okay, so now let's hop back over to the Redevelopment Commission. They had to deal with a rather unusual problem, a mole infestation at the baseball fields.
Moles, those little critters, can cause a lot of trouble.
Apparently, they've been tearing up the downtown baseball fields and Founders Square, leaving those molehells everywhere.
Trip hazards galore.
And they approved an estimate of $2,500 to hire a local wildlife control company to deal with the problem. They're going to be using bait in the mole tunnels.
So a humane approach.
Hopefully it'll do the trick, because they were saying that this is a safety concern for the folks using the fields.
Yeah, you don't want someone twisting an ankle because of a molehill.
Definitely not the kind of injury you want.
All right, so the RDC also had a discussion about updating the city's comprehensive plan, which is kind of like a roadmap for future development.
It's a big undertaking. They're not messing around. This update will be led by the Planning Department, and they'll be making recommendations to the Plan Commission, who will then be in charge of picking a qualified planning consultant to actually do the work.
So a multi-step process.
And then once they've got a consultant lined up, the RDC board will decide how much money to allocate for the project.
Sounds like a thorough and well-organized approach.
They're not rushing into anything.
Okay, so last but not least, the RDC had a deep dive into their proposed budget for 2025.
Budget time, everyone's favorite.
They went through both the general fund and the allocation fund, with a fine-tooth comb.
Leaving no stone unturned.
So the general fund is looking pretty healthy. They're expecting revenues of about $1.85 million, which includes a nice refund from a bond that matured.
A little bonus.
And their planned expenditures are around $735,000, which means they should have a surplus of roughly $350,000.
Not too shabby.
And that money covers things like staff salaries for the RDC professional service fees, general operating costs, and the expenses for the NERSI building.
Keeping the lights on.
So the general fund is in good shape. What about the allocation fund? That's where the tax increment financing money comes in, right?
Exactly, TIF. For those in the know.
And for those who aren't, what is TIF?
It stands for tax increment financing, and it's basically a way for cities to fund redevelopment projects in specific areas by capturing a portion of the increased property tax revenue generated by those projects.
So they're reinvesting that new tax revenue back into the area.
It's a powerful tool for revitalizing neighborhoods. Okay, so back to the allocation fund. They're projecting revenues of about $9.3 million, mostly from TIF revenue and the money they already have in the bank.
So they're not hurting for cash.
And they've got about $4.6 million in expenditures planned, which leaves them with a projected surplus of around $4.67 million to roll over into the next year.
So a nice cushion for future projects.
Some of their big-ticket items include a $1.5 million match for a community crossing grant, which will be used to resurface roads within the allocation area.
Keeping those roads smooth.
And they're also planning to loan $700,000 for those public safety vehicles we talked about earlier.
Putting that money to good use.
Plus, they've got $199,000 set aside for grants to the fire, police, ambulance, and park departments.
Spreading the love.
Supporting those essential services.
And they also went through a list of prioritized capital projects, which total over $10 million.
Big plans.
They've got projects in the high, moderate, and low priority categories, and a big chunk of that money is earmarked for high-priority stuff like that community crossing grant match and improvements to Central Avenue.
Got to keep that main drag looking good.
And they're also eyeing some potential land acquisitions, which could cost around $7.2 million.
Strategic investments.
And all these priorities were based on input from working group sessions and feasibility studies.
So they're doing their homework.
They also suggested maybe setting up a more formal capital improvement planning process in the future, possibly with a rating scale, to help them prioritize projects even more effectively.
Always looking for ways to improve.
Oh, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have a real whirlwind tour of Portage government.
From the nitty-gritty of zoning decisions and housing developments to the big picture stuff like budget planning and economic development.
You now have a solid understanding of what's happening in Portage, the city's financial health, the projects they're prioritizing, and the decision-making processes that are shaping the future.
And for me, some of the biggest takeaways were realizing just how much work went into reconciling those past budget discrepancies, seeing how different city departments have to coordinate and share resources to make things happen, and witnessing their proactive approach to dealing with infrastructure challenges like those sinkholes and getting ready for pothole season.
And that new housing development really highlighted how the city's trying to balance growth with the need for adequate infrastructure and maintaining those aesthetic standards.
It's a constant balancing act.
And for you, our listener, understanding how local government works gives you valuable context for the changes you see happening all around you. And it also shows you how you can get involved and make a difference.
Your voice matters.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to chew on. With all these plans and projects in motion, how will these decisions ultimately shape the character and the quality of life in Portage down the road?
And what unexpected challenges or exciting opportunities might pop up along the way?
It's going to be fascinating to watch it all unfold.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Portage government.
We'll see you next time.